I never thought my life would turn into a legal nightmare. I never imagined the person who would betray me the most would be family. My own mother-in-law, the woman who smiled at me, who held my hand during pregnancy, the woman who stole my child. But let me start from the beginning. It was a bright spring morning when I saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. My hands shook as I stared at them, my heart pounding inside my chest. Pregnant? I was going to be a mother. Daniel, my husband, came home from work that evening exhausted as usual. He worked long hours at the family company, a business his mother, Margaret, controlled with an iron fist. When I showed him the test, his face lit up. He grabbed me, spun me around, and laughed like a little boy. He said, "Emily, oh my God, this is amazing." We sat on the couch for hours, dreaming about baby names, nursery colors, and our future as parents. Of course, his mother, Margaret, was the first person Daniel called. At first glance, she was warm, elegant, poised, the perfect mother-in-law. She always knew the right words, the perfect smile, the comforting touch. But beneath that polished surface was a woman who thrived on control. The next morning, Margaret showed up at our home, carrying bags of prenatal vitamins, baby books, and a thick folder of important documents she insisted I review. She said to me, "You know, dear, there's so much to prepare for. I've been through this before. Let me help guide you." I was grateful, or perhaps naive. I didn't see the early signs. She began attending every doctor's appointment. She started handling my insurance, speaking on my behalf at clinics. She insisted we hired a gynecologist she trusted, a family friend. She even managed most of our finances under the guise of lightening our load. Daniel, my husband, encouraged it. He always said, "Mom's just trying to help. She means well." As the months passed, I started feeling burdened. I started feeling smothered. Margaret decorated our nursery. Margaret hired a nanny in advance. Margaret chose the daycare center before the baby was even born. I gently pushed back. "I think I should make these decisions," I said to her. She smiled, placing her hand on mine, and she said, "Of course, dear. You're absolutely right. I'm just here to support you. But motherhood can be overwhelming. I really want what's best for you and my grandchild." That phrase, "my grandchild," she repeated it often, almost like a claim of ownership. When I was 7 months pregnant, I developed gestational hypertension. My blood pressure skyrocketed. The doctor, her doctor, recommended bed rest. I was scared, exhausted, and vulnerable. Margaret took over completely. She paid bills, scheduled appointments, even managed my personal identification documents. At times, she made me sign forms, insurance documents, medical consents, power of attorney forms, all while saying, "Routine paperwork, dear, nothing for you to worry about." And I trusted her. Labor came early. Daniel rushed me to the hospital. Margaret arrived before we even checked in. The delivery was complicated. The baby's heart rate dropped. The doctors rushed me into an emergency C-section. As I drifted in and out of consciousness under anesthesia, I vaguely heard voices. Margaret was whispering to me, "Don't worry, everything is under control." I woke up hours later. Our baby boy, Liam, he was so beautiful, healthy, perfect. I held him close, tears streaming down my face. Daniel stood by my side, beaming with pride. Margaret hovered nearby, watching. The next morning, Margaret walked in with a hospital administrator and a stack of paperwork. Then she said, "Now, sweetie, these are just discharge forms and insurance updates. The hospital requires everything be signed before you can leave." I was groggy, medicated, exhausted. I glanced at the stack briefly. It all looked standard. Medical jargons, legal phrases. The administrator smiled politely and said, "It's all routine, Mrs. Turner." I signed, signature after signature, page after page, and sealed my own nightmare. The first few weeks at home were beautiful. Liam was thriving, but Margaret's presence grew more invasive. She dismissed the nanny I hired. She changed feeding schedules. She installed cameras in the nursery for safety. Then she said to me, "You thank me later, dear." Daniel started spending more time at work. At night, I found myself alone, except for Margaret's constant interference. Then one morning, I woke up and Liam was gone from his crib. Panic surged through me. I rushed downstairs and found Margaret calmly feeding him. Then she said sternly, "He was crying. You needed rest." Her words were soothing. Her tone was patronizing, but something shifted inside me, a seed of doubt. 2 months later, the unimaginable happened. A child welfare officer showed up at my door. She said, "Mrs. Turner, we've received reports that you may not be fit to care for your child. We are here to conduct an assessment." I was stunned. Margaret appeared behind me, putting on her concerned face. Then Margaret said, "I'm so sorry, Emily. They are only here because I care about you and Liam. You've been under so much stress." The officer inspected my home, questioned me, examined Liam. When she left, I broke down sobbing. Daniel comforted me, but looked detached. Then he said, while avoiding eye contact, "Mom's just trying to make sure you're okay, Em. Don't overreact." But something was terribly wrong. I started digging. I went through the paperwork I had signed in the hospital. Buried inside the stack was a document titled Voluntary Adoption Agreement. My hands trembled as I read the fine print. It stated I had willingly surrendered parental rights to Margaret Turner. I couldn't breathe. I confronted Daniel that night. And I told him while screaming, looking desperate, sounding so desperate, "Did you know about this? Did you know?" Daniel froze and he softly said to me, "Mom said it was just temporary, just for legal protection while you recovered." I started crying. And I said to him, I would never sign away my child, Daniel. Him being defensive said, "She said you were too overwhelmed. She promised everything would be fine." My world shattered. Margaret didn't deny it. She said in a cold and calm way, "Emily, you were unstable. The courts would have seen it the same way. I protected Liam. I protected you." Then I screamed at her in all frustration, "You stole my baby." She tilted her head, smiling softly, and said to me, "Prove it." Her words sent chills down my spine because she knew she had covered her tracks. I contacted several attorneys. Most of them said the same thing. The first person said, "The papers are legally binding." The second person, "She has legal custody." The third person, "Without proof of coercion or fraud, it would be difficult." But I wouldn't give up. I couldn't. Liam was my son. Margaret may have won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. I didn't know how deep Margaret's lies went. I didn't know how many people she had manipulated. I didn't know that even Daniel would choose her side. But I made a promise to myself that night. I would fight. I would get my son back, no matter the cost. They say a mother knows when something isn't right. But what if it's already too late? What if the very moment you realize the truth is the moment your world is already slipping away? After I discovered those papers, after I realized my own mother-in-law had tricked me into giving her my son, everything began to unravel, and the nightmare had only just begun. It had been 3 days since I confronted Daniel. 3 days of silence. He barely looked at me. He slept in the guest room. Every time I reached for Liam, Margaret found a reason to step in. She took him for strolls. She fed him. She even began referring to herself as his guardian. She would say, he needs routine. He's comfortable with me. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear everything apart. But I was scared. Scared I would look unstable. And if I wanted my son back, I had to be strategic. A week later, they returned. Child Protective Services. But this time, they didn't come to inspect. They came with papers. The social worker, Miss Adams, said to me, Emily Turner, due to legal documentation and allegations regarding your mental stability, your access to Liam will be supervised moving forward. I felt my knees buckle. I then said to her, what allegations? I'm his mother. Then she said to me, we've reviewed signed adoption agreements, medical reports citing postpartum distress, and statements from the guardian. Guardian. That word, as if I was just the incubator. Then I screamed. I never gave her custody. I didn't know what I was signing. They looked at me with sympathetic eyes. But the papers had power. Margaret stood silently, cradling Liam in her arms. Her eyes gleamed with victory. That night, I forced Daniel to talk. I said to him, you're letting her take our son? Why? Daniel, exhausted, said to me, you don't understand, Emily. My mom, she always takes care of things. She said it was temporary. Then I replied to him, so why won't she give him back? He didn't answer. Then I said coldly to him, do you even want him back? He finally looked up, tears in his eyes. He said to me, I don't know anymore. I didn't want to lose you. I thought this would help. I realized in that moment, Daniel was not just weak, he was complicit. I found a new attorney, Maya Collins. She was sharp, relentless, and empathetic. She reviewed the documents and frowned. Then she said to me, these signatures, they are authentic, and the notary verified it. This will be difficult. Then I replied her, she manipulated me. I was on meds. I was recovering from surgery. I wasn't in my right mind. Then she said to me, can we prove that? I shook my head, but then something flickered in her eyes. Then she said, wait, there is no psychological evaluation in this report. Where are the mental health notes that support the instability claims? We looked closer. Margaret has submitted fabricated therapy logs signed by a Dr. Lowe Henry. A quick search revealed no such doctor existed. Then my attorney leaned forward and replied, saying, now we are getting somewhere. With my attorney's help, Miss Collins, we petitioned the court for access to Margaret's home records, financials, medical bills, anything tied to Liam. The judge allowed limited discovery. We entered Margaret's house under court supervision to inspect the nursery. I hadn't been in that room in weeks. It had changed. Photos of Liam and Margaret decorated the walls. A baby book titled My First Year with Grandma. A framed certificate labeled Guardianship Custody Permanent. I broke down, then tucked beneath the crib. Collins found a file box. Inside were copies of emails, messages from Daniel to Margaret. One stood out, where he said to her, "Just make sure Emily doesn't know. I'll sign whatever you need, Mom." 2 weeks later, we filed for motion to reverse guardianship based on fraud. Margaret was furious. In court, she wore her mask of composure. Then she said on the stand, Emily was deeply unstable. She would cry for hours. She couldn't breastfeed. She once forgot to change Liam's diaper for a whole day. Me in tears replied, "That's a lie. I was recovering from surgery." Then the judge said, "Order, please." Then Collins presented the forged mental health documents and everything shifted. She then said, "There is no licensed psychologist named Henry Lowe in the States. These are fabrications." Margaret's attorney stumbled, but it wasn't enough. Then the judge said, "We'll need to investigate further. Until then, the child remains in the care of the current guardian." That night, I sat on the porch steps, numb. Then a voice spoke beside me. It was Miss Adams, the social worker. She said, "I believe you." I turned in shock. And she said to me, "I looked into that doctor too, and I saw how your son clung to you at the last visit." Then she said to me that the court needs something solid, something undeniable, something more. She handed me a card. Then she told me, "Talk to Detective Ramos. He's worked fraud cases like this quietly." Detective Ramos was sharp-eyed, calm and methodical. He reviewed everything: the notary stamps, the email evidence, hospital records, even surveillance footage from the day I signed the papers. And then he found it. Security camera footage showed Margaret speaking with the notary behind closed doors, 15 minutes before I even signed the document. That was suspicious. Even more suspicious was the fact that the notary had resigned days after the adoption was finalized. Detective Ramos then said to me, "This isn't just manipulation. It may be criminal." When Daniel was called in for questioning by Detective Ramos, he tried to stay composed. But under pressure, his story changed. Then he said, "My mom said it was for the best, that if Emily had a breakdown, child services would take Liam away. I didn't know what else to do." Then Ramos said to him, "Did you know about the fake doctor's reports?" Daniel's silence was deafening. Then Ramos said again, "She's your wife, and you helped take her child away." Daniel finally broke and said softly, "Yes, I knew. I didn't stop her." With Daniel's admission and the fake documentation exposed, the judge approved a formal hearing to challenge the adoption. Margaret was arrested for fraud, document forgery, and obstruction. I watched from the courtroom as they placed cuffs on her wrists. She still didn't look afraid, just angry. Margaret then said to me as they walked her away, "You don't deserve him." I stood in that courtroom not as a victim, but as a mother. And for the first time since Liam was born, I felt hope. The nightmare wasn't over, but I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, I had truth, and I was ready to bring my son home. They say justice is blind, but I learned it can also be deaf. Deaf to a mother's cries, blind to the manipulation of the powerful. And yet, I refused to give up. I was going to fight the system, even if it crushed me first. The courtroom was cold that morning. The air so thick with tension, I could barely breathe. On one side sat Margaret's new legal team, a group of high-priced attorneys hired to save her from herself. On my side was just Attorney Collins, Detective Ramos, and Miss Adams, who risked her own position to support me. But the stakes weren't just legal. Liam was still in foster care, placed there temporarily as the court unraveled the mess Margaret had created. Every second away from him felt like an open wound. Margaret's lead attorney, Mr. Whittaker, was ruthless. Mr. Whittaker's opening statement was, "Ladies and gentlemen, while unfortunate mistakes may have occurred in paperwork, at the heart of this case lies one truth: the welfare of the child. And that child has lived under the loving care of my client, Margaret Turner, since birth. Mrs. Turner acted only to protect both her grandchild and her daughter-in-law during a period of mental fragility." He looked directly at the jury. Then he said firmly, "Emily Turner may regret the decision she made, but regret does not undo legal consent." I wanted to scream. The next few days were brutal. Margaret's team attacked my credibility. They called my old therapist who mentioned my anxiety before the pregnancy. They referenced my postpartum exhaustion. They presented photos Margaret secretly took, moments of me crying, looking overwhelmed. Every image painted me as unstable. Then Mr. Whittaker said, "Is it true, Mrs. Turner, that you once locked yourself in the bedroom and cried for 2 hours while your infant son lay unattended?" I was shocked. I found myself choking back tears. Then I replied, "I was suffering from postpartum depression, but I never endangered my son." Whittaker smiled coldly and then said, "No further questions." But Collins wasn't deterred. She brought in Dr. Patel, a perinatal psychologist. Dr. Patel said calmly, "Postpartum depression is common, treatable, and does not equate to unfitness. The photos you've seen reflect a mother navigating an overwhelming period, not an unfit parent." Collins then said, "Doctor, does temporary depression justify permanent loss of custody?" Dr. Patel replied, "Absolutely not." The courtroom murmured. For the first time, the narrative began to shift. Then came Daniel, my husband. He took the stand trembling. Collins stood up and asked, "Mr. Turner, did you knowingly assist your mother in misleading your wife regarding custody documents?" Daniel replied with his voice breaking and said yes. Then Collins asked, "Why?" My husband Daniel started crying and said, "I was scared. My mom said it was for the best. I thought Emily needed time to recover, but I didn't understand the damage we were doing." He paused and said, "I betrayed my wife. I regret it every single day." Detective Ramos presented his investigation next. He laid out the bribed notary, the forged medical reports, and the surveillance footage. The jury watched the video showing Margaret speaking privately with the notary before I even ever signed the document. Ramos now said, "This wasn't guardianship. This was premeditated fraud." The silence in the courtroom was heavy. Even Whittaker shifted in his seat. Finally, Margaret herself was called to the stand. Collins approached and asked, "Mrs. Turner, did you fabricate Dr. Lowe's psychological reports?" Margaret said calmly, "I simply did what was necessary to protect my grandchild." Collins then asked again, "Yes or no, Mrs. Turner?" Margaret, still calm, said, "The system would have failed him. I saved him." Her arrogance was palpable. Collins pressed harder. Then he asked, "And did you coerce your son into helping you deceive his wife?" Margaret paused. For the first time, her lips quivered. Then she said quietly, "I guided him. He trusted my judgment. Her own words condemned her. The jury was dismissed. I sat gripping Colin's hand in the silent courtroom. Hours passed. It felt like days. I closed my eyes, picturing Liam's face, his tiny fingers, his soft breathing when I used to rock him to sleep. I whispered to myself, "Please, bring him home." Finally, the jury returned. The judge was reading and said, "On the charges of fraud, coercion, and unlawful custody transfer, you are rendered guilty." I gasped. Then the judge said, "The adoption agreement is hereby nullified. Full legal custody is restored to Emily Turner." I sobbed uncontrollably. Margaret sat frozen, finally speechless. Daniel lowered his head, tears streaking down his face. The bailiff led Margaret away. I whispered under my breath, "It's over." Days later, I stood at the foster care center waiting. The door opened and Liam toddled towards me on shaky little legs. Liam, with his tiny voice, said, "Mama." I fell to my knees, scooping him into my arms, sobbing into his soft hair, while I said, "Mama is here. Mama is home." I fought the system. I fought the lies. I fought my own family. And in the end, truth won. But scars remained. And I knew the fight had changed me forever. They don't tell you what happens after the courtroom. After the victory is declared, you think the nightmare is over. But the truth, the real battle begins when you're left to pick up the broken pieces. And sometimes, the shadows you think are gone find their way back. Liam was finally home. The house felt different now. The silence was no longer terrifying. It was peaceful. I redecorated the nursery, hung new photos, tried to erase the memories of Margaret's intrusion. Liam was adjusting, but cautiously. Sometimes he'll call out for grandma in his sleep, confused. Then I'll whisper to him in a soothing voice, "It's okay, baby. You're safe now." But at night, the guilt clawed at me. Had I failed him? Had the trauma clearly already rooted itself too deep? Dr. Patel recommended trauma counseling for both Liam and me. Every week, we sat in a soft lit room, stacking building blocks while I spoke. Then I said, "He wakes up screaming sometimes. I think he's scared I'll leave." Dr. Patel said to me gently, "Children sense instability, but he's resilient. Stability, love, and routine will rebuild his sense of safety." Then I whispered, "And me?" Dr. Patel said, "You survived hell. Now you need to allow yourself to grieve." But grief is strange. It creeps in quietly, often disguised as anger or fear or guilt. 2 months after the verdict, Daniel requested to see us. I hesitated. The betrayal still burned inside me like acid. But for Liam's sake, I agreed. We met at a supervised visitation center. Daniel looked smaller now, thinner, older. Then he said softly, "Hi, buddy." Liam clung to me at first, unsure, but slowly warmed to him. After Liam was led out to play, Daniel turned to me, with his voice trembling. Then he said, "I was weak. I should have protected you. I failed you both." I then replied him in a cold and composed manner, "You handed our child over." Daniel then said to me, "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Tears pooled in his eyes. Daniel then said, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know I finally saw how wrong I was." Weeks later, an official letter arrived. Margaret Turner is filing for an appeal. My stomach twisted. Then I said to Collins, "How? She's convicted." Collins then replied to me, she has a right to appeal the custody decision, but not the criminal conviction. It's a long shot, but we can't ignore it. The fear rushed back like a flood. I wasn't ready to relieve the courtroom, the lies, the attack. Not again. Shortly after the appeal was filed, strange things began happening. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night, notes left on my windshield saying a child needs his real family. Someone slashed my tires. Detective Ramos reopened an investigation. Then he said, Margaret might still have people willing to act on her behalf. I replied him trembling. What more does she want? She lost. Ramos said to me, control. Some people don't know how to stop. Security cameras were installed. Police patrols increased. I barely slept. The local media caught wind of the appeal. Reporters showed up outside my house. Then I saw from a reporter on TV, the ongoing Turner custody saga continues as convicted grandmother Margaret Turner seeks to overturn the custody reversal, raising questions about the family's deeply divided past. My name was everywhere. I couldn't take Liam to the park without cameras following. Strangers whispered behind my back at the grocery store. Then I said to Collins, I feel like I'm living inside a scandal movie. Collins said to me, we'll fight it, Emily. Again, if we must. Collins hired Gerald Hill, a private investigator. He was quiet, methodical, and within 2 weeks, he uncovered something crucial. He said, Margaret has been communicating with a distant cousin. Money has been exchanged. That cousin hired people to harass you. Police raided the cousin's home. Emails, payment records, and explicit instructions were uncovered. Margaret was charged again, this time with conspiracy and witness intimidation. 3 months later, we returned to court. Margaret sat shackled, but her eyes still burned with cold determination. Her new attorney argued procedural errors, claimed my initial mental health was still questionable. Collins responded fiercely. Every accusation was dismantled with hard evidence. This appeal is not about justice, it's about obsession. Margaret was allowed one final statement. She stood with a bitter voice and said, I only did what any mother would do for her grandchild. My daughter-in-law was unfit. She still is. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's voice was firm. Then the judge said, appeal denied. Custody remains with the biological mother, Mrs. Turner. You are ordered to cease all contact with the child indefinitely. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the weight lifted. Liam and I could finally breathe. We moved into a new home, smaller but ours. Fresh paint, bright windows, new beginnings. I planted a small garden out back. Liam loved to help, digging holes, planting seeds. He would say to me while laughing, flowers, mama. I smiled, my heart finally healing. Life isn't about returning to what was. It's about growing into what can be. I lost so much, but I gained something more powerful than revenge. I gained freedom, peace, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Margaret's shadow may always exist somewhere, but here in our little garden, under the sun, we are safe and we are finally home. Liam was safe, but evil doesn't always knock on the door. Sometimes it slips through cracks you never knew existed. I never imagined what was still waiting for us. A year had passed. Liam was thriving. He started preschool, making friends, giggling freely. The nightmares had stopped. The fear had finally loosened its grip. And for the first time, I allowed myself to relax. I even started dating again, cautiously. Ben, he's kind, gentle, and patient. A man who understood my scars. Ben said to me while smiling, "You've been through hell, Emily, but you're stronger than anyone I've ever met." For the first time in years, I allowed hope to bloom. One quiet Saturday morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single flash drive and a handwritten note. The note said, "You don't know everything. Watch carefully." Confused but curious, I inserted it into my laptop. What played on the screen froze my blood. The video was grainy but clear enough. Margaret in prison, speaking to a visitor I didn't recognize. A tall man, sharp suit, expensive watch. Margaret was whispering, the adoption was only part of the plan. She was never supposed to keep him at all. The man nodded. Then the stranger said, "We can still arrange it quietly. There are people who specialize in these transfers." Margaret then said, "I want my grandson, no matter the cost." The footage cut off. My entire body shook. Even from prison, she was orchestrating something else. I immediately called Jared Hell, my private investigator. Within 48 hours, he identified the visitor. His name is Victor Crane. International connections, known for illegal adoption rings, but slippery, hard to pin down. I then panicked and asked, "Is Liam in danger again?" Then he said, "I believe so." We notified Detective Ramos. Surveillance was placed around my house. Police monitored Liam's school. 1 week later, it happened. A dark van appeared near Liam's preschool. 2 men exited, approaching the playground fence. Fortunately, undercover officers intervened before they could act. Both men were arrested. Inside the van were duct tapes, zip ties, a sedative. It wasn't just intimidation this time. They were going to take him. The arrest led to new evidence. Financial transfers from Margaret's offshore accounts, communications between Victor Crane and the kidnappers. Even from behind bars, Margaret had continued pulling strings. New federal charges were filed. Margaret was transferred to a maximum security facility. Her prison sentence was extended indefinitely. The judge now said to her family, "You are now considered a continuous threat to the child. No further contact is permitted under any circumstance." Victor Crane was elusive, but weeks later, international authorities finally captured him overseas. During his US trials, his testimony revealed horrifying details. He said in a cold and unapologetic tone, "We specialize in children placed into wealthy foreign families, clients who pay handsomely. Mrs. Turner was simply another client with deep pockets." I nearly vomited in court. How close I had come to losing Liam permanently. The media devoured the story. Public sympathy flooded in. Strangers sent letters of support. Mothers from across the country reached out. For the first time, I didn't feel alone, but trauma leaves residue. At night, I often stared at Liam as he slept, wondering how evil could target someone so innocent. Another year passed. The legal battles finally closed for good. Ben proposed. We married in a small private ceremony, Liam beaming as our ring bearer. We moved out of state. A fresh start. New names, new home, new peace. Evil tried to steal my child twice, but we survived. We endured because love is stronger than greed, stronger than obsession, stronger than fear. One quiet evening, I sat rocking Liam as he drifted to sleep. He looked up, eyes drowsy but safe. He said in a soft whisper, "Mama." Then I smiled and said, "Yes, sweetheart." Then he said in a tiny voice, "You always keep me safe." Tears welled in my eyes. "Always, baby, always," I responded. I kissed his forehead, watching his breath even out into peaceful sleep. The nightmare was over and we were free.